Good afternoon, everybody. We are just about to start this program. Folks will still be coming into the Zoom room as you all have gotten here as well. So we'll just let them in as they show up. I'm Reverend Howard Dana, and I want to welcome you to this afternoon's event. It has had a lot of planning that has gone into it, and we're very much looking forward to the conversation this afternoon. I am the senior minister at First Parish in Concord, and I want to welcome you to this afternoon's event. We at First Parish in Concord know a lot about social justice. We've been standing there in the middle of Concord for almost 400 years, and through all of those changes, First Parish has been at the center of the thought as it has evolved over the centuries. We're affectionately known as the Church of the Transcendentalists because that's where some of the major Transcendentalists went. Margaret Fuller, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, and others were well known in our congregation. It's also the church that the Reverend Dr. Dana McLean Greeley served. He was first the president of the Unitarian Universalist Association in Boston, and he then went on to serve the church after he was done being the president there. He served the congregation from 1970 until his death in 1986. And he's one of the folks that the Greeley Scholarship is named for, the Greeley Scholar for Peace. So I want to just welcome you to this event. Glad you're here, whether you're in and around Concord or joining us from somewhere across the United States or even around the world. This is exactly where you're supposed to be for the next 90 minutes or so, so welcome. I'm so very pleased to have Dr. Fania Davis joining us this afternoon. She will be formally introduced by the next person, who's C.C. King, but we're really glad to have you here, Dr. Davis. Welcome to you as well. The last little thing that I will say is that if you would benefit from having closed captioning that is available on your device, you should look for it near the bottom of your screen. There's a little box that has a CC in it, and that should give you the option of turning on the closed captioning if that's something that you would benefit from. Another tip in Zoom is for a presentation like this, it's best to have your device set in speaker view. That will allow you to see the person who's speaking the largest on your screen. So go ahead and set that up. That's generally up in the upper right-hand corner of your device. And the last thing I'll note is that we do have the chat enabled. Feel free to use it. We'll be soliciting some questions from it, but we have not, we're keeping your all cameras off and muted. So the chat is your opportunity to interact with us. Again, welcome to this afternoon's event. And now C.C. King will introduce Dr. Davis.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's wonderful to have you here. I'm a member of First Parish in Concord and was also on the board of the Greeley Foundation at the time that it established with UMass Lowell the Greeley Peace Scholar honor. I'd like to just say a couple quick thank yous. One is to our co-sponsors here, which include UMass Lowell and the First Parish Communities Racial Justice Action Group and Women's Parish Association. And also a quick thank you to the person who really was the engine behind this whole event, which was Marilyn Lowett. She started months ago rallying people, welcoming ideas, collaborating, convening. And so we just want to hold her up as providing a tremendous amount of energy to make us able to gather today. So the Greeley Scholar Program was funded by the Greeley Endowment for Peace Studies and was established with a major gift from the Greeley Foundation and from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. The award is named for Dana McLean Greeley, and Howard told you a few things about him. He was an international peace activist, worked actively with the World Conference on Religion and Peace, which continues its work today in the Middle East and elsewhere. And at the time of his death, the Greeley Foundation for Peace and Justice was established by friends and colleagues at the Concord congregation to continue his work and his mission. In its first decade, the foundation focused largely on international efforts exchanges for peace and justice with partners such as Margarita Papandreou of Greece and Working for Women for a Meaningful Summit. In its second decade, the foundation activists chose a more regional focus, awarding grants to support community-based programming for youth and grassroots organizing in the Boston area, while continuing to rally a listening public with voices such as Professor Cornel West. Throughout its history, its essentially 20-year history, the foundation's goals were to promote dialogue and leadership, to elevate integrity, compassion, and courage, and to seek creative ways to realize the unifying power of peace. Thus, a natural outgrowth of this mission was the establishment of the Greeley Scholar for Peace program at UMass Lowell. The Scholar program funds a distinguished advocate for peace, noted humanitarian or faith leader each year. This scholar is selected on the basis of his or her ability to effectively promote the cause of peace and conflict resolution at local, regional, and national levels, and international levels. Since its inception in 2008, there have been 11 scholars chosen. Dr. Davis is the 11th. And among them were 2 Nobel Prize laureates, Layman Gobawi of Liberia and Tawakkal Abdel Salam Khalid Karman of Yemen. Also 2 figures for whom restorative justice was a central theme, Linda Beale and Albie Sachs. Linda Beale, who was the first recipient in 2008, became dedicated to restorative justice through the killing of her daughter in a township in South Africa. Her journey to healing became synonymous with that of one of the young men who had participated in her daughter's death. The first Greeley Scholar presentation was these 2 people together, speaking side by side about the work to overcome the annihilation of self in the apartheid culture and about building profound peace through reconciliation and even love. So there is something of an arc of justice, restorative justice, and for truth and reconciliation that we should be here today to honor and hear from Dr. Fania Davis. She is a leading national voice on restorative justice. She's a longtime social justice activist, a civil rights attorney, a restorative justice practitioner, a writer, a professor, and a scholar with a PhD in Indigenous knowledge. She came of age in segregated Birmingham, Alabama, during the social ferment of the civil rights era. The murder of 2 childhood friends in the 1963 Sunday school bombing crystallized within Dr. Davis a passionate commitment to social transformation. And as an adult, urged by the unlawful detainment of her sister, Angela Davis, Dr. Davis was called to both become a rallying international speaker and to become a trial attorney. She invested her fierce activism in civil rights, Black liberation, women's rights, criminal justice reform, as well as peace, anti-violence, and anti-apartheid movements. During the 90s, feeling the toll of fighting within a punitive court system, Dr. Davis chose to enter a PhD program in Indigenous studies. She'll tell you more about this, I'm sure. This work, studying with Indigenous elders around the globe, catalyzed in her search for healing justice, ultimately compelling her to bring restorative justice to Oakland as a founding director of the Restorative Justice for Oakland Youth. Her numerous awards include the Ubuntu Award for Service to Humanity, the Dennis Maloney Award for Excellence in Youth Restorative Justice, World Trust's Healing Justice Award, the Tikkun Repair the World Award, the Ella Baker Septima Clark Award, the Bioengineers Changemaker Award, and the Ebony Power 100 Award. She is a Woodrow Wilson Fellow, and the Los Angeles Times named her a new civil rights leader of the 21st century. Today, Dr. Davis brings her considerable experience, her heart and brilliance to crafting a process that combines healing together with social and racial justice to change and heal racial traumas. I just finished with a quote from her. History is asking us to become leaders, healers, all of us, wherever we are. So please join me in welcoming this extraordinary person and guide, Dr. Fania Davis.
Thank you so much, C.C. King. I want to also thank First Parish Church Pastor Howard Dana, Reverend Howard Dana, for inviting me to be with you today. I want to thank Marilyn Lowett for your lead organizing work on this event. Of course, I also thank the university and the Greeley Peace Scholar Committee and everyone who helped organize my Greeley residency and this visit to First Parish this afternoon. It's not only humbling to receive the honor of being the 11th 2021 Greeley Peace Scholar. It's humbling to be standing, at least virtually, on the ground where Reverend Dana Greeley, longtime and beloved minister of your church, stood, where this great leader in the Unitarian Universalist denomination stood, where a great civil rights and anti-war activist who marched in Selma and Montgomery, alongside Dr. King and many other civil rights giants stood, and where I just learned today the great transcendentalists Thoreau and Emerson attended. I am grateful to his home church, Reverend Greeley's home church and his family, and you and the church who created the Greeley Foundation, whose endowment partially funds the Peace Scholar program at UMass Lowell, that allowed me to be in virtual residency for 2 weeks. I am further humbled, truly, and honored to join the company of such distinguished Greeley Peace Scholars as Albie Sachs, the great South African anti-apartheid activist and South African Constitutional Court jurist, as C.C. King was telling you about, and to be joining such esteemed Nobel Peace Prize winners as activist Lema Gbowe, and also to be joining Linda Bill, the incredible restorative justice and peace activist, and of course the mother of Amy Beale. They are truly my sheroes and heroes. I want to acknowledge each and every one of you for being present here today. I've heard about your restorative justice work, and I've heard about your racial and social justice action groups within First Parish and in the larger Massachusetts UU community. We gather today, of course, during the month of Dr. King's assassination. This is also the International Month of Genocide Prevention Awareness. Yet, emerging from a winter of seemingly interminable darkness, we are seeing the glimmers of dawn. This season of renewal, of rebirth, of fragrant blossoms and fresh beginnings is coming upon us. I want to take a moment to honor the indigenous inhabitants of the land where you are. I think the Wampanoag are amongst them. I don't know the rest. And also allow me to acknowledge the ancestors of the land where I am, where I live and work and play. I'm on the unceded territory of the Chochenyo Ohlone people in Oakland, in the San Francisco Bay Area. Let us pause and reflect on the significance of these land acknowledgements that are now becoming customary throughout the nation to open public gatherings. First, in indigenous cultures, the land does not belong to us. We belong to the land. She is our great mother. She is the womb of creation. She gives us life. She enfolds and nourishes and nurtures and holds us and sustains us. It is heritage in indigenous cultures to honor and give thanks to the land, to open public gatherings. Today, in this historical moment, to invoke the land and its original inhabitants is also to acknowledge that, just as with slavery and the slave trade, we as a nation have yet to fully recognize, take responsibility for, and take reparative action for the colossal harms of genocide and colonization, land theft, and all their afterlives. So today, to invoke the original inhabitants of North American lands is also to acknowledge this is an occupied land. Every acre, no less than the West Bank or the Ukraine, are occupied lands. To invoke the land is also to acknowledge this is a post-genocidal land. No less in Germany or Rwanda are post-genocidal lands. Let's pause a brief moment and inhale and take in and internalize these troubling truths that for so long have been buried. Land acknowledgements are only the first step on the reckoning journey. We must not only recognize history's pain, we must take responsibility for it, we must take action to repair it and prevent its recurrence, as I just said. And these are the four R's of restorative justice accountability. How are you as an individual? How are you as First Parish, as Concord, as Massachusetts, holding yourselves accountable? I imagine some of you are already engaged in conversation with and maybe working in collaboration with Indigenous inhabitants of your land to come up with accountability strategies and plans. Here where I am in Oakland, the Ohlone people are asking the city's non-Indigenous residents and businesses to pay the Shumi land tax to support the critical work of the Shogareya Land Trust that is reclaiming stewardship of their ancestral land, restoring creeks, native habitats, and wildlife corridors. The land tax that I pay annually merely gestures toward the reparations that is needed. Of course, international standards require that the scale of reparations be proportional to the magnitude of the harm. Therefore, so much more is required at every level: individual, institutional, local, state, regional, federal. Another small step on the reparations journey for Indigenous peoples was taken at the federal level when, drum roll, our new Secretary of the Interior, Deb Haaland, yes, we want to acknowledge that, and Senator Elizabeth Warren introduced Truth and Healing Commission legislation in the Congress to investigate the US government's practices of genocide. To transform from a culture of violence, the culture of violence that we have historically been, to a culture of peace that we all dream of, we need multiple concurrent reckonings happening on national, regional, state, local, institutional levels, and happening within ourselves as well, to address historical and ongoing harms against Black, Indigenous, other peoples of color. And to conduct these reckonings, we cannot just rather rely on the traditional methods of transitional justice and truth and reconciliation that are centralized, that are top down, that are expert driven, that are systems driven and dominated. We need more decentralized, community driven, horizontal processes that center the voices of those most negatively impacted as well. For if these systems of domination are in control of these processes, they will only replicate more systems of domination. And so that is why systems must share power with communities as we engage in these truth processes. And that is why communities must lead these processes. We cannot solve our problems with the same thinking used when we created them, as Einstein has said. Also, as we open this afternoon, let us honor the now 561,000 souls who have lost their lives due to previous presidential mismanagement of, and due to the injustices laid bare by the coronavirus. May we assure their deaths shall not rather be in vain. Let us also honor Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and countless souls whose lives were taken by police terror. May we assure that their deaths too shall not be in vain. And let us honor and express solidarity with the indigenous peoples of our lands. Let us honor those lost to anti-Asian hate violence. Let's take 3 deep collective breaths together in their honor. Thank you. And so, in my time with you this afternoon, I want to share with you my personal story, the story of my journey to both racial and restorative justice. And then we'll talk about restorative justice fundamentals, and I'll share with you some stories about my work in Oakland with the youth there. And lastly, we'll address this historical inflection point in our nation and consider how we might meet this moment. And just because I don't like to do long, talks, we're going to break this up. I'll talk a bit, and then we'll have a conversation with the moderator, and maybe take some questions from you from the chat. So that's how we're going to proceed, if that's okay with you. So I was born in the most segregated city of the South, Birmingham, AKA Birmingham, with all its bombings meant to terrorize activists in the rising civil rights movement. Our family lived atop Dynamite Hill, a neighborhood targeted because Black families dared move into this all-white area. Some of my 3 siblings and my earliest childhood memories are being awakened in the wee hours by dynamite blasts demolishing nearby homes. The sight of our father grabbing his gun to protect us, his family, from racial terrorists lurking in the bushes nearby. Some of the first words we learned to read were colored and white, omnipresent words written on bathroom doors, water fountains, lunch counters, bus signs. Our childhood games were acts of resistance. Forced to climb the back stairs to sit in the balcony of the local theater, we threw popcorn and Coca-Cola onto white heads in the whites only section below. Our games were games of resistance, like crossing the racial dividing line. We'd ring the doorbell of a white person's home and then run back across the street as quickly as possible to escape before the door opened. 2 of the 4 girls killed in the Birmingham Sunday school bombing in 1963 were close friends, Cynthia Wesley and Carol Robertson. Cynthia lived just a few doors down. We played together. Carol's family and mine were all friends in the same social clubs. And so I left the South and these experiences of racial apartheid and terror with a lot of anger at injustice. I left the South with a ferocious, irreversible commitment to be a warrior for justice. As Cece mentioned, I became active in many movements: the civil rights, Black Power, Black Panther, prisoners, women's, anti-apartheid, anti-war, anti-imperialist, and others. In 1969, when my husband and I moved to California and worked with the Black Panthers, police broke into our home and almost killed my husband. We were charged with attempted murder of police officers. Charges were dropped when the judge ruled this was political persecution. Police broke into our home solely because of our political activism, and the judge said this was in violation of our constitutional rights. A few months later, then President Nixon, and then California Governor Reagan targeted my sister, Angela Davis. I don't know if you've ever heard of this particular person. But anyway, Angela was targeted for illegal lynching on false charges of capital murder, kidnapping, and conspiracy. After 2 months underground on the FBI's 10 most wanted list, Angela was captured. And from that day forward, I worked nonstop with family and others, traveling the world to build an international movement of millions to save my sister. In 1972, an all-white jury actually acquitted my sister. In many ways, it was the people who freed her. I was in my early 20s at the time, and the amazing lawyers on my sister's legal team inspired me to become a civil rights trial lawyer. After more than 25 years of fighting injustice in the courts and streets, I was filled with anger. Anger against Birmingham, anger at the near-fatal police encounter, anger at the attempted execution of my sister. I got sick, and intuitively I knew it was the rage that was consuming me. Intuitively I knew that to find balance, I needed to invite more healing and more spiritual energies into my life. Synchronicity and dreams led me to a PhD program that allowed me to study with healers in Africa. So I shut down my law practice. And then when I returned from Africa and finished the PhD, I learned about restorative justice for the first time. This was a game changer for me. This justice that is a healing ground, this justice that is not a battleground, this justice that is more concerned about getting well than getting even. This justice that is akin to Dr. King's vision of justice. Justice is love, correcting that which revolts against love. Akin to Mahatma Gandhi's notion of justice, that act alone is just, that does no harm to either party to a dispute. So finding restorative justice was a life-changing moment, an epiphany. I no longer had to choose between being either a warrior or a healer. I could be both at the same time. Restorative justice allowed me to embrace both the inner healer and the inner warrior, allowing me to move deeper into my own wholeness as a human being. And if we are to move into a future, I believe history is calling us to be both warriors and healers. Warriors in this world of unfathomable injustice, and healers rather, in this world of unfathomable harm. And I explore this theme in my little book of Race and Restorative Justice. And just so you know that, and you probably already know this and understand this, when I use the word warrior, I'm using it in its higher spiritual meaning, the warrior sage and the spiritual warrior. In 2005, I founded a nonprofit, Restorative Justice for Oakland's Youth, and Our Joy is the acronym. And important to Our Joy goal is to promote restorative alternatives to respond to youthful wrongdoing in schools, communities, and justice system, instead of using punitive alternatives that cause more harm. We help youth, especially historically marginalized youth, to talk through instead of fight through their differences. We also help them embrace their sacredness and their power through cultural healing and community leadership. Another of our goals is to interrupt the racialized school-to-prison pipeline. Now, before I break for a moment to have a conversation with the moderator, Marilyn, I want to turn to an important matter concerning restorative justice in the US. In the first 3.5 decades of its existence, the national restorative justice community has historically been virtually all white, with little or no racial justice consciousness. That was really shocking to me when I first discovered it. How could a movement that seeks to transform justice have no racial justice consciousness in a nation where the deep and long-standing inequities of our justice system so disproportionately impact Black and other people of color. I couldn't understand it. But then upon reflection, it's not so shocking, given that white supremacy, structural racism permeate and pervade all our institutions and our collective consciousness, leaving nothing untouched, nothing. The good news is our joy, our restorative justice for Oakland youth, with others have changed this. And of course, the Black Lives Matter movement changed that too. Though this is still very much a work in progress, we have growing numbers of books and articles and essays, and we are holding trainings and conferences and convenings that grapple with the subject of both race and restorative justice. Also, restorative justice, or our joy rather, is recognized today as a national, if not international, thought leader in practicing restorative justice through a racial justice lens, and in a way that honors its indigenous roots. And again, to learn more about that, I refer you to my book, Little Book of Race and Restorative Justice. All right, so can we pause for a moment here, Sarah, our tech support person, and get Marilyn up so we can maybe have a little conversation. Hello. Yes, we're good. Thank you. Okay. So, great.
I think Sally Lewis is gonna come, but
I'm sorry. Yes, that's my error.
she is. She is.
Sally.
All right.
And CC King and Reverend Howard Dana, all three of you. I hope you can.
All right, we'll stay.
Are you good, Sally? Are you?
Sorry, can you hear me? Oh, there we go. I couldn't get my video to stay on. That was a little frustrating. I'm sorry.
Well, you're here now.
I'm here now, and I'm here. We're going to have a conversation, and I think that Marilyn or any of the other people who are part of this, CC, Reverend Howard Dana, could also answer your questions. So I'll please let you start, and we'll respond in whatever way we can.
Sure.
After your moving introduction. So thank you.
Thank you, Sally. So any of you, I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts. Do you see any pertinent questions in the chat at this point? Any comments on what I've already said? Mm-hmm.
No, well, we can start with, certainly. We do have a question from Jeff Lowe in the chat, who really would appreciate, and are you defining restorative justice? Is that appropriate now, Dr. Davis, or do you want to wait?
Why don't we defer that? Who is it? Jonathan, you said?
It's a Jeff Lowe.
Jeff, sorry.
So I guess that's good. We can wait for that definition, certainly.
Yeah, so we're gonna have a section as soon. We're gonna have a little video, Jeff, and we'll have a conversation about that. And if you still would want to ask that question, we can definitely do it.
Great.
I could ask a question. Some of the folks at First Parish are involved with working with Resma Menachem's information on somatic abolitionism and the book My Grandmother's Hands. Are you familiar with?
I am with that book. I love that book. It's a Bible for us in many ways. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I guess I'm very deeply moved by the sort of healer and the warrior. And whether it's now or later, I think just to ask you to address, like, how is the warrior, especially for white people, how is that warrior sort of informed and infused by the healer in a way that can just help guide us toward activism in conscientious, caring ways?
Yeah, I think this, well, for white persons, first of all, having that bravery and that courage to really look in the mirror and confront and scrutinize and examine the ways in which we or you as individuals perpetuate systemic and structural racism. And being, really thoroughgoing about it and not and unflinching about it, that takes the warrior to do that. And understanding that it's not a failing personally. You're not a bad person as a white person who perpetuates structural and systemic racism in the ways that you're present individually in the world. This is the air that you breathe. This is the water you drink. And just looking in the mirror, that takes courage, that takes warriorship, and that takes compassion for yourself as well. And that's where the healer comes in. It's not about guilt tripping yourself. It's not about hating being white, So that's what I'd say.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Marilyn, do you have a question? You just came up? No? Okay.
Oh, comments, yeah, not just questions.
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly for me, I'm mesmerized by your speaking, and it's hard not to feel responsible in a way that I don't know how to manage. And I think that's probably a pretty common reaction. So I think your words to Cece were really helpful. I wonder how you manage your rage and your anger. And that's one of the questions that Diane Proctor has asked, because I think we want to be present and take action. And in the area of rage, it's we don't know what to do. So
yeah, and that's a really important question. How do I manage it? It's been, and it is it's been a long and ongoing process for me. Going to Africa was especially important for me, and sitting at the feet of African indigenous healers who were carriers of just millennia of ancient healing ceremonies and herbs and traditions and songs, and being immersed in all of that was profoundly healing for me. And going to my mother country of Africa was generally a healing experience for me. Going to Benin and learning there that they had songs and they had shrines that were dedicated to us, the ones who had been taken by slavery, and they had ceremonies and rituals calling us back. I had no idea. It was just having these kinds of amazing spiritual experiences in Africa were very transformative for me. And of course, today I do a daily meditation practice, a prayer practice. I have an ancestral practice, and I do Qigong, and I honor my body, just all of that. I eat well, and I eat whole foods and organic foods and plant-based foods. And I think all of that is part of my own healing.
great, thank you.
Yeah. Shall we get back? Because I know I'm getting really into this talk, and we could go on and on and on.
And we could, I'm sure, listen to it for a long, long time. So, yeah.
Okay, so we'll get back to my remarks and specifically on restorative justice. I'm going to say a few words, Sarah, and then I want you to cue up the video, not right now, but so restorative justice is a healing justice that has been dawning on the stage of human history in the last 4.5 decades. This is both a new and an old justice, in the sense that restorative justice is rooted in ancient and ageless wisdom traditions, peacemaking traditions. For those of you who are already familiar with restorative justice, and I know that a number of you are, as you work with Concord's communities for restorative justice, please bear with me, those of you who already know all of this. a few moments as I review the fundamentals of restorative justice. Sarah, can you get the video up, please?
Ready when you are.
I'm ready. Mhm.
If crime hurts, then justice should heal. That's Fania Davis. It makes sense, right? Unfortunately, that's not what we're doing. In the US, there are 2.2 million people behind bars and nearly 5 million on probation and parole in a system of mass incarceration laden with racial injustices that disproportionately affect minority communities. 1 out of every 14 children has a parent in prison, destroying the health, stability, and resources of entire communities. This is the retributive justice system, and it operates on the theory that punishing people for crime makes them stop. It's hugely expensive, destructive to the human spirit, and worst of all, it doesn't work. Psychiatrist James Gilligan even calls it the most powerful stimulant of violence that we've yet discovered. People are looking for another system. Fortunately, there is one. It's called restorative justice. It focuses less on punishing the crime and more on holding people accountable in order to heal the harm. Restorative justice is based on who we really are. We're designed to live in community, to be of service to one another, and to nurture and repair our relationships. Where the retributive system asks, who did it, what rule was broken, and how do we punish them? Restorative justice asks, what is the harm? Who has been harmed? How do we repair it? Here's how it works. All the stakeholders get a chance to be heard in a facilitated process that balances the needs of victims, offenders, and the community. The person harmed explains how he or she was hurt. This itself is healing as it meets the need for acknowledgement, validation, and repair. The person who did the harm is held accountable in a new way. They're also given the opportunity to accept responsibility for their actions, which is also healing, share their perspectives, and to make amends for the harm they caused in the relationships that were broken. The whole community has a chance to address the underlying problems that gave rise to the situation, and then everyone works together to find a way to restore balance and offer healing to all stakeholders. In restorative and community justice, the concept of beloved community and living in right relationship is key. You're restoring justice and just relationships within the whole community. Does it work? Well, look at this. In the prison system, wherever restorative justice is tried, recidivism has plummeted. In schools, switching to restorative justice drops suspension, improving students' educational and social well-being while reducing bullying and other manifestations of violence. And it costs next to nothing by comparison. One teacher said, "Every time I used the retributive system, I lost a relationship. Every time I use this new system, I gain one." Restorative justice is justice that works, justice that transforms, justice that heals. Now that sounds like something we all want more of in our communities, so spread the word in yours.
Okay, so thank you, Sarah. So as you can see, our restorative justice invites a paradigm shift in the way that we think about and do justice. We can say prevailing justice is a retributive justice. If I harm someone, this creates an imbalance in the scales of justice. And the only way that we can rebalance the scales is for me to be harmed. If I cause harm, I must be harmed, whether suspended or expelled in school settings, or punished, incarcerated, or executed in justice settings. In other words, we harm people who harm people, presumably to show that harming people is wrong. But this only multiplies, replicates, reproduces harm, right? And we model exactly the behavior we say is wrong, right? Go figure. It's crazy. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth leaves the whole world blind and toothless, as Mahatma Gandhi has said. We can't expel darkness with darkness, only light can do that, as Dr. King has said. The beauty of restorative justice is that it does flip the script. It pretty much all boils down to the three ways that humans respond to harm. One, retaliation is the first way. Some people strike back in vengeance, but as we said earlier, that only replicates pain. That only increases the collective energies of violence on this planet. Avoidance is the second way. There's a conflict averse, but denial causes the wound to fester, to grow, and to metastasize. Yet others lean into conflict, and this is the third way. It allows us to learn and grow and change from our mistakes. It prevents recurrence. It interrupts cycles of harm and violence. It increases the collective energies of peace. Of course, our criminal injustice system responds in the first way with a second harm. Restorative justice takes the third way, leaning into conflict in ways that help people grow and learn. Many of you who are practitioners know that restorative justice is more than a conflict resolution method. Indeed, a restorative justice is more than conflict resolution. It is a way of life. Restorative justice is a set of values that guides our lives. Restorative justice is profoundly values-driven. Restorative justice is a worldview rooted in ancient wisdom traditions that center values of radical respect, relationality, and responsibility. Those are the 3 R's of restorative justice values, according to Howard Zehr, who was considered the grandfather of contemporary restorative justice. Just parenthetically, because it's so easy to get this confused, I want to clarify. I talked earlier about the 4 R's of restorative justice accountability. Recognizing harm, taking responsibility for harm, making reparations for harm, and ensuring or preventing recurrence of harm. Now I'm talking about the three R's of restorative justice values. Let's take them one by one. First of all, respect. I'm reminded of the Zulu greeting, Sawubona. Sawubona means I see you. I see your goodness. I see your spirit. So respect means honoring that inherent goodness or honoring that spark of divinity that is present within every human being. And this Sawubona was so important and is so important in our work with young people here in Oakland. And this gets at the spiritual roots of restorative justice. The second value is relationality. Restorative justice is rooted in Ubuntu, the profoundly communitarian view of Southern Africa that was popularized with the 1994 Truth and Reconciliation Commission under Archbishop Desmond Tutu during the time of the presidency of Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela. Translated, Ubuntu means, as I'm sure most of you know, I am because we are. We are because I am. I am who I am because of my relationships with other beings, with all beings. We are relational beings. Reality is not atomistic. Reality is not comprised of isolated and separate particles that have no inherent relationship. The nature of reality is interrelationality. The nature of reality is interrelationality. We all know that Dr. King held a similar view about the interrelated structure of reality. We all remember what he said about us participating in an inescapable network of mutuality, and what affects one affects all. And so restorative justice is based on the Lakota Sioux core value of Mitakuye Yasin as well. Translated, that means we are family, we are relatives, we are here on earth to learn to take care of one another. This gets at the indigenous roots of restorative justice. And the Western world, of course, has only recently caught up. Quantum physics today affirms this ancient truth about the deeply interrelated structure of reality. And so the third value is responsibility. We exist in a web of reciprocality and interrelationship for good or bad. COVID-19 is an example of how it can be for bad. But precisely because we are so interconnected, we bear a responsibility to live in right relationship with one another. Meaning that if we end up hurting one another, we are responsible for acknowledging that harm, taking responsibility for it, and taking action to repair it and to prevent recurrence of it. So, of course, there's also the value of healing that is fundamental in restorative justice, that is overarching in restorative justice. And to practice restorative justice with fidelity means we are intentional about, in a very personal way, embodying these values, living these values, modeling these values. Not just when we're in the peacemaking circles, not just when we are in the community conferencing, not just when we're in the victim-offender dialogues, but modeling and embodying and living these values all the time, at every moment, to the best of our abilities. And embodying these values in such a way that we are always able to bring forth the best version of who we are as human beings in every moment, in every interaction of our lives. I want to quickly add, because it is a set of principles, restorative justice is practiced in diverse settings in family, community, school, justice, church, and others. We even have restorative architecture, restorative economics, restorative medicine, restorative education. Not only are restorative justice applications virtually limitless, but research, as the video indicated, demonstrates its effectiveness. And just a bit about our experience in Oakland, California, our first school pilot in a under-resourced and high crime area of Oakland was so successful that with a push from student organizing, the school district adopted restorative justice as as public policy. By responding to youthful wrongdoing restoratively instead of punitively, we slashed suspension and arrest rates, and we saved thousands of children from the school to prison pipeline. We also reduced racial disparities in school discipline, although more work is still needed on that. And we saw positive social outcomes. Students learned to talk through instead of fight through their differences. Kids, when they would have difficulties, and I remember that in one middle school in particular, some kids were out on the playground and were starting to have some conflict, and they both ran into the school building and into the peacemaking room, the restorative justice room, and asked the restorative justice coordinator for a talking piece so they could sit down and talk through their difference in circle. And then another story, some young men from the same middle school were about 2 blocks away from the school, and they were literally, beginning to come to blows. A neighbor came upon them, and knowing about the program at the school, she escorted them to the school. And when they got into the peacemaking room and started talking to the restorative justice coordinator, they said, we can't fight at school, and now we can't even fight in the neighborhood. Yes, that's right. So we began to see a cultural change. Also, we saw girls who were long-term enemies become friends after peacemaking circles. We saw youth and adults who walked into circles feeling anger, walk out of those circles embracing. And these were typically in gang-type contexts. And importantly, in Oakland, where most of our violence is retaliatory violence, when we did community grief and healing circles after homicide, there was no retaliatory violence. Very briefly, restorative justice is not a panacea, it's not a magic wand, and it's not always appropriate. If a party causing harm does not take responsibility for harm, that fundamental value of restorative justice, taking responsibility, if the harming part, the responsible party does not take responsibility or minimizes the harm or trivializes the harm, a restorative justice process is not appropriate at that time, because an encounter with the person who has been harmed will cause further harm. If a person is wrongly accused of harm also, restorative justice would not be appropriate. All right, so Sarah, can we get Sally back and Cece perhaps and others back for a little conversation? Thank you, Sarah.
So I have questions for you.
Okay.
Davis, if that's okay.
Sure.
I've got them in the chat. You've actually, people submitted questions beforehand, but you've actually answered quite a few of those. So
Good.
let me start with one from Davi, who says, do you feel that racial restorative justice has been co-opted in any way by the PIC circles in prisons? Restorative justice circles in prisons, RJ meetings in schools that include police and therefore replicate systems.
Go a little bit slower, please. That's a complex question. Yeah.
So the question is, let me start again from Davi. Do you feel that racial restorative justice has been co-opted in any ways by the justice circles in prisons or RJ meetings in schools that include police and therefore replicate systems of oppression and punitiveness? Does that make sense to you?
Oh, of course. Thank you, Donnie, for that question. It's a very important question. We're vulnerable, of course, when we try and do healing processes, when we're right in the heart of so much harm and so much we're right in the belly of the beast, basically. So yes, it's very, very difficult to do this work of healing inside of systems of domination. It is so easy to be, these are hegemonic spaces. When we're surrounded by values that are the polar opposite of what we stand for, yes, indeed, there is a huge danger of co-optation. And in places, including in Europe, where restorative justice, you have to, take tests and you have to become certified and you become a professional restorative. No, that is an example of how restorative justice is being co-opted. When we do it in schools, yeah, that is also a system of domination. There's no question about that. And so what we try our best to do is to hold fast to those values those values of respect and relationality and responsibility, and values of anti-racism, values of anti-heteropatriarchy, values of anti-racial capitalism. Really centering those values in our work is key in order to counteract the tendency or the danger that we might be co-opted. Also, Dottie, really centering relationships with communities. For example, in Oakland, the work is influenced by, and it was actually started by Restorative Justice for Oakland Youth, a community-based organization. So maintaining and sustaining those community relationships is really important also as an antidote, or at least a counter measure against co-optation. And in the prisons, you know, again, how do you do these? How do you create these? You're basically trying to create a liberated zone within a highly and totally oppressed community. And, you know, I've actually seen some good work being done in prisons, in San Quentin in particular. But again, you know, we must always be mindful of the great danger of co-optation and always stick to those values. Yes. Okay. Next one, Sally.
Okay, so we have one from Leslie Fisher, and other people have responded like, yes, please have her answer that one. Is it true that Indigenous peoples traditionally used and still use restorative justice? If so, how do modern restorative justice practices compare?
Yeah, this is a little tricky because, you know, we are skirting here on the dangers of cultural appropriation. I wouldn't say that restorative justice circles, you know, are being used in Indigenous communities, because I mean, I think restorative justice is a modern form it's an expression of the values of Indigenous values. I wouldn't say the actual model itself is being used in, well, let me put it this way. All right, so the peacemaking circles that we do are definitely rooted in Tlingit Tagish practices of Canada. Of Indigenous peoples, First Nation Indigenous peoples. And let me just say, there is a book called The Little Book of Peacemaking Circle Processes by Kay Pranis, who is the foremost trainer and scholar on peacemaking circles. She is white, and she makes it clear whenever she speaks and does this work that she was taught these processes, these peacemaking processes by Tlingit Tagish people. And these processes are based on traditions of Indigenous peoples. And then this particular group, the Tlingit Tagish, gave her permission, not only taught her these processes, but gave her permission to in turn teach these processes to others, non-Indigenous peoples. So yes, restorative justice practices are very specifically, the peacemaking circle, very specifically rooted in Indigenous traditions. And I think that Leslie had another part to that question. I can't remember exactly what it was, but I just want to say that even though we say that we, you know, that we are inspired by Indigenous traditions, we want to steer away from from cultural appropriation. So if we use a ceremony in, say, a peacemaking circle, if someone decides to smudge or use sage to open a peacemaking circle, we talk about that, and the person who is doing this smudging saying they learned that process from whoever they learned it from. They will explain the meaning of it and do it in a very respectful way. So to avoid cultural appropriation. I hope, I know I bumbled a little bit on that, but I hope that that's clear.
I have a couple of specific questions, and then I have a broader one that's come in. So let me go to some specific. It's talked about, could you talk about, I think these are related. So peacemaking rooms at the high school level.
Yeah. Mhm.
Because, and I think along with that goes, what does your work with parents look like? So I don't know if those are related, if you can relate those.
Yeah.
And how are they educated and brought on board? So peacemaking
Yeah.
rooms, parent education, getting parents involved.
Okay, and then someone asked what was the author, name the author again. That's Kay Pronis of the Little Book of Peacemaking Circles. Yeah. So peacemaking rooms, it depends on who the restorative justice coordinator is. But that's an important point to take note of, that it's important in terms of doing this work in schools with fidelity to have a person who is dedicated to just doing this restorative justice work. Not somebody who does restorative justice work and then does DS, that breaks up fights outside, and who's the firefighter, and not somebody who also does detention work, when kids are held in detention. No, this person is dedicated. That's their baby, is to do nothing but restorative justice. And the space they have is a healing space. It's a peacemaking space. And the rooms are decorated in ways that we actually had. I talked about the field of restorative architecture. We had an architect come and create a peacemaking room at one of our high schools. So we have circles. The chairs are in circles, and we might have bean bags, and we might have literature about peacemaking. It's a beautiful, healing, welcoming environment typically. Now about the question having to do with parents. That is something that we are still, I'm still working on. We are it is a work in progress. I think in other cities, people have probably had more experience working with parents. We have had parents in trainings, and then, when the child engages in wrongdoing, and we do a circle process instead of dismissing or suspending or expelling the child. Of course, we bring in the family, and they sit in the circle where they take responsibility, and everyone takes responsibility, and everyone comes up with a plan for repairing the harm, including the parents, the teachers, the principal, students who may have been impacted by the harm. But we have always had a goal of, working with parents so that the children would be doing these processes, not just in schools, but in their homes. Yeah.
Yeah. More at the high school level or the grade school level? I mean, where is this?
We started in the high school level because I wouldn't have had it that way, but that's where the funding came from, because that's where a lot of the media attention was on violence in schools. But of course, it makes far more sense to start off the kids this way, in elementary school. And that is happening now. We're seeing more programs in elementary schools, thank goodness. Now, I think we only have about 15 minutes left. So maybe a couple of more questions, and then I'll.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions, and they're big, so I'm going to pose them, but I know that you can determine how you answer them. So there's a big questions for all of us, right? Can you say what anti-racial capitalism looks like? That's from Pamela Drift and Ann Eldridge Malone. And how can we make progress in ending systemic racism and promoting?
Let's just take one at a time, please. Okay. Can we?
Anti-racial capitalism, what does that look like?
Start with that one?
Mhm.
Okay. So, well, first of all, let me just quickly say what I mean by racial capitalism, and it's not just what I mean. It's it's referred to in the scholarship. There are books that have been written about racial capitalism, but the idea is that capitalism began in a symbiotic relationship with slavery. The capitalism that we know in this country was nurtured through and supported by slavery. There could be no Manchester, without Mississippi. There could be no factories without whips. So we're just saying, when we say racial capitalism, we're saying there is a symbiotic and intimate relationship. You can't have one without the other. And so anti-racial capitalism means that you have a consciousness that it was that racial capitalism is a way of life, not just an economic arrangement that was born in the blood of genocide, land theft, and slavery, and the slave trade. That is, all of that stolen labor and all of those stolen lands is why we are such the powerful economy that we are today, the global economy. That is why. And so, and also capitalism is as an economic system is responsible for all of this harm that we see around us, the colossal harm, not only of genocide and land theft and slavery and the slave trade, but of the ravaging of the earth, you know, of the illness that we see all around us, and the Superfund sites and the pollution. So when we say it's important for us to embody or to be anti-racist, racial capitalism in our orientation, that's what I mean by that. We need to not only reimagine ways of ensuring public safety so that Black lives will matter, but we need to reimagine economic systems so that we can create a world where everyone's needs are met and everyone is cared for, everyone is nurtured, and everyone can thrive. That cannot happen under racial capitalism. So when we're in these restorative processes, that's, you know, in the belly of the beast, in the prisons or in other systems of domination, that is an important value to always embody and bear in mind.
Thank you.
Okay. Shall I go back? I mean, we've got 10 minutes now. Yeah, okay. I hope I have, I'll try to cut this short. I don't know if I'll have enough time, but I'll do my best. Okay. So before closing, I want to address this inflection point in our history. This is a dark time of untold suffering, yet this is a luminous time of hope. Today, we bear witness to an extraordinary moment when we are finally looking in the mirror, finally facing the truth that we are a nation born not in liberty, but in terror. At last, we are disrupting centuries of collective denial about our collective biography. We are realizing that our textbooks, our literature, our popular culture, our narratives have all been sanitized to support the mythical narrative of American innocence, the land of the free, and the world citadel of democracy. White people today are facing the truth like never before in this time of awakening. In police protests after Michael Brown's 2014 killing Black people were a majority. But the legions marching in 50 states and 2,000 cities in the greatest movement ever in history, after police crushed George Floyd to death, are majority white. All of those marching after George Floyd, in all of those demonstrations, the majority were white. Only yesterday, white people were skeptical about Black Lives Matter. This past summer, 2/3 of the nation supported it, including 60% of white people. In numbers unparalleled, white people are writing and reading anti-racism texts and noticing and eradicating ways they personally perpetuate structural racism. Increasing numbers of universities are telling the truth about complicity with slavery and the slave trade, apologizing and engaging in reparations and memorialization. Statues extolling slavery and the Confederacy are falling. Memorials honoring those enslaved and lynched are rising. The terms reparations and white supremacy are moving from margins to mainstream. Systemic racism is nearly a household expression. It is not only a time of awakening, it is a time of reparations. It is a time of releasing old institutions that don't serve us. And it is a time of reimagining new futures. That is what the Defund the Police and Reimagining New Ways of Ensuring Public Safety initiatives are about, including in Oakland, where we have removed the police from schools and replaced them with peace ambassadors, with restorative justice practitioners, and with counselors. And we have already cut 50% of the city police force, and are figuring out how to reimagine policing and how we ensure public safety, relying more on communities instead of policing. So this awakening and repairing and reimagining is what the hundreds of reparations and truth and reconciliation initiatives bubbling up throughout the nation are about. This is what HR 40 in Congress now is about. And I urge you to check out the Why We Can't Wait letter. Just Google that. Why We Can't Wait letter, HR 40, to learn more about and to support the HR 40 legislation to establish a commission to study and propose reparation for slavery and its legacies. I'm sure many of you already know about this bill. That's what this awakening and this repair and this reimagining is what the scores of university initiatives are about as well. The initiatives where universities increasingly are seeking to recast themselves as anti-racist institutions. Creating an anti-racist culture and creating anti-racist institutions is not just about transforming systems of domination and racialized and genderized hierarchies of power that live outside of us. It's also about confronting and eradicating these very same systems that live inside of us. On personal levels, it means shifting to ways of being present to one another and to the world, from ways that create domination, discord, devastation, to ways of being present to one another and to the earth that bring healing and wholeness and holiness. This again is about embodying these values that we were talking about earlier. And so history is inviting us to be both warriors and healers, to seek both justice and healing. Restorative justice and its indigenous orientation offer important healing and justice resources. Associated with this leap in the consciousness of white people about systemic racism is a burgeoning of anti-Black racism resources. There is a proliferation of books, as you know, I'm sure, in the emerging field of critical whiteness, like D'Angelo's White Fragility, Debbie Irving's Waking Up White, Nell Painter's The History of White People, Ibram X. Kendi's How to Be Anti-Racist, and many, many others. In addition to the flourish of literature, amazing anti-Black racism affinity organizations of white people are emerging and spiking in membership. For example, I'm speaking of Showing Up for Racial Justice, SURGE, Coming to the Table, White Awake. These three groups challenge systems of racism that exist in society and challenge those very same systems that live within us and them. So in closing, just a few more comments. I hope that we continue to educate ourselves about Indigenous peoples wherever we are, that we continue to explore what concrete action we as individuals or institutions can take to recognize, take responsibility for, repair, and prevent recurrence of harm. And I hope that we can do the same in respect to accountability for slavery and the slave trade and their legacies as well. I hope that we support reparations, that are going on, the hundreds literally of reparations initiatives today at local, state, and of course at the national level. I hope that we continue to learn about restorative justice and that we practice it through a racial justice lens and in ways that honor and respect its indigenous roots. I hope that we can be intentional about embodying its values in every moment of our lives. And if you are white, I hope that you continue to educate yourself. I know everyone out there is already educating themselves. Continue to do so. It's a lifelong journey. Examine and eradicate the ways you personally perpetuate systemic and structural racism. And I appeal to you as white people to model what it means to be a white anti-racist. I ask you to educate your own people. Don't rely on people of color to do that. And the wind is at your back. You have everything you need. There are so many resources today. I ask that we exercise the muscles of our imagination. We as activists have always known what we don't want, but too rarely do we reflect on what we do want. So nurture your inherent creative powers. And take precious good care of yourself. Eat mostly whole plant-based foods, and commune with nature. Commune with the earth. Commit to a regular mind-body awareness or spiritual practice. Get enough sleep and surround yourself with positive energies and relationships. Laugh, cry, dance. This work is holistic, and the healing applies that we need must but also and simultaneously be a project that we are engaged in ourselves. And finally, as Professor Cornel West has said, don't just have hope, be hope. So thank you so much. With that, I conclude my remarks. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's too big and broad for words. And thank you so much, Dr. Davis. And I do want to say that there are already a number of good resources being shared in the chat. And we will put Sarah, our tech support person, just put in some ways to get engaged if you want to be more involved. I believe we're going to make an attempt to share some of the answers to questions and the resources in an email in the aftermath of this program. Okay. So I'm saying that with a little bit of ambiguity because, you never know, but that is our intention.
So I'll just say, I'm happy to assist with that as well, because okay. I know that there are a lot of questions that we probably didn't get to.
Great. Well, that definitely confirms and affirms the intention. Thank you so much. I mean, you have offered us a gift, like to carry forward. I mean, and speaking as a white person, for us, it is a must, as you have told us, for us to tune in to, in fact, the colossal harm that we have historically and present tense been a part of, and it extends to the earth. And yet to have that and go through it is our hope for reimagining the future. So thank you for the kind and brilliant way you have brought that forward today and in your work. And may we continue to follow and stand up and be warriors and healers. Yeah. So I think we all clap now, even though we're on Zoom, but yeah, we do our hearts. Yeah. Thank you all for being here. A program like this only exists because we're in relationship with one another. So
may we meet again, and be safe and be blessed. Stay well. Thank you.